Welcome to the Threat Podcast, where we talk about the most pressing, yet not always so visible threats to global and domestic security. I'm Jay Solomon.
And I'm Hagar Chemali.
For many in the U.S., the threat posed by the Al-Qaeda terrorist organization is sort of a thing of the past and a bad memory from the September 11th, 2001 attacks on New York and Washington. Successive U.S. governments spent 20 years occupying Afghanistan to deny Al-Qaeda a safe haven from which to again launch attacks against the West. Even though the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan in 2021, Al-Qaeda has yet to regain a major presence there. This isn't the case in West Africa, though. In recent months, an Al-Qaeda affiliate, which goes by the acronym JNIM, has continued to gain ground in the nation of Mali and is essentially encircling the capital of Bamako. Using drones, Starlink terminals, and a mix of Islamist and tribal forces, JNIM is on the precipice of being the first Al-Qaeda affiliate to essentially gain control of an entire country. And JNIM's leaders are talking of creating an Islamist superstate in West Africa, which could include neighboring countries like Benin, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Hagar, this sounds kind of nuts. Didn't you think, like I did, that Al-Qaeda was kind of a thing of the past?
So, sort of. It's interesting because when I used to work in counterterrorist financing in the government, we really viewed our efforts. Those efforts were really effective in getting at their assets and undermining them. And so, maybe not quite a thing of the past, but certainly nowhere near the threat that they used to pose. The thing is, I will tell you, I remember when I was in government, and I remember Mali becoming an issue. And at that time, it was shortly after the Arab Spring. The U.S. government was stuck in a whole, it was a slew of issues. We had Syria, we had Libya, we had Iraq was still a problem. We were still in Afghanistan. We had all sorts of problems. And I remember when the French were like, we got this, we're going to take control of it. And in the United States at the time, it was like, oh, good, they got it. And I'm not sure how much they focused on it since then, but yeah, I mean, it's rearing its ugly head again. That's for sure.
And it doesn't feel like people right now are paying attention to it in Washington at all.
I wonder about that. I will tell you, having been on the other side in government, that there are always Africa experts and they are always screaming for more attention. So there are experts out there and they do focus on this and they write about it and they argue for policies and so on. But they do tend, like in government too, and in media, but they don't tend to get the attention they deserve. That's for sure.
To discuss these worrying developments in West Africa and the resurgence of Al-Qaeda, we're lucky to have on the threat Sarah Harmouch. Sarah is an expert on Al-Qaeda and counterterrorism writ large, and she is the CEO of the risk assessment firm H9 Defense. She's also a fellow with us at the program on extremism. So Sarah, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jay and Hajar, for having me today here. I'm really looking forward to talk about this issue.
Great. Well, just to begin, can you give us just basically the status of the situation in Mali right now and the very real threat that Al-Qaeda could essentially take over the country? I mean, Al-Qaeda activity is not new in Mali, but it's certainly gotten a lot worse. And given reports that JNIM is essentially like encircling the capital of Bamako, and it feels like they're almost like starving the place out. So just give us a scene setter.
Yeah, I think that's a great beginning to discuss these issues. So Mali in West Africa is one of the countries that's further along the path to state failure than any country an Al-Qaeda affiliate has ever pushed. I mean, you've mentioned the capital, and since September of last year, JNIM has run an economic blockade on Bamako. And Mali is landlocked and imports about 95% of its fuel by road. So JNIM has been very strategic and deliberate in its approach when it comes to Mali and Bamako specifically. So it's been burning over 300 tankers on the highways from Senegal and Ivory Coast, and JNIM has also choked the capital without even fighting inside of it. Schools, which resulted to schools being closed, lights being out. Western embassies have also told their citizens to leave. And just this recent April, JNIM put its own checkpoints on roads around the city. And even more recently, on April 25th, JNIM and its new Tuareg allies, the FLA, have launched the largest offensive since 2012 rebellion, and where they hit 6 cities simultaneously. That attack was very well planned, and it was very sophisticated. They've killed the defense minister with a suicide bomb at his home. They wounded the intelligence chief, and they also forced the junta leaders there to evacuate. And a second country offensive also started around July 4th. So this is a really live issue as we speak about it. And you've mentioned when they're encircling Bamako and how is it that they're going to take over. I don't think JNIM wants to take over Bamako. I think they're much smarter than that. They're very deliberate. And this goes back to the Bin Laden era and also the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb era, AQIM, who's also one of the closest allies and relationships and affiliate to JNIM itself. Bin Laden knows they've seen the mistakes that were done before when the Islamic State took over very fast. And they've also seen the mistakes that Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, has done within North Africa around that time when it comes to governing and when it comes to taking territory. So JNIM learned from that, and Bin Laden has focused on taking territory very, very slowly and very, very gradually, and governing and doing that very slowly so they don't overextend and they don't become too expensive and overstretched thin that they're not able to sustain their governing project. So I see when it comes to Bamako and encircling it doesn't mean that they want to storm it. They don't need to take over Bamako. They just need Bamako to fail. And by that measure, they are winning right now.
So I'm curious a little bit because, as we talked about, these threats aren't new in Mali or in West Africa in general. And I'm curious how you view Al-Qaeda and its affiliates and jihadist groups, their growing power in West Africa, and what that means about, regarding their resurgence globally, and why they've been able to hang on and grow this way in West Africa, right? Like, what is Al-Qaeda's support there rooted in?
I think this is a great question. It's a very interesting one because Africa's always been a region where a lot of the factors and the issues like poverty, low governance, no government services. There's also the chain of coups that occurred in the early 2020s have also increased the likelihood of these actors to take advantage of that, to exploit the vacuum, to fill in those services. And they've really learned well how to do it. And, this is what both you and Jay have talked about at the beginning of the podcast is a lot of people think Al-Qaeda is a phenomenon from the past. It's silent, it's gone, it's not making noise, which usually the West and Western experts see it as, it's declining because as the West sees noise as a signal of strength. And when there's no noise, and when Al-Qaeda is not conducting international attacks or any attacks on the U.S. homeland, then it becomes a thing that we don't really need to focus on. But that's the thing. I don't think Al-Qaeda is resurging. I think Al-Qaeda's strategy is arriving where it always intended to go. The whole plan of Osama bin Laden, the whole plan of Al-Qaeda to begin with from the start is a 7-step plan where they move back and forth between each one of them, whether it's conducting terrorist attacks to break the United States' prestige and its allies, to overthrow Muslim-run governments. But the eventual goal is restore an Islamic caliphate. And by that measure, JNIM is standing as one of the main affiliates since Afghanistan and the Taliban to actually reach that. But they're not rushing through it. They're very deliberate. They're very strategic. They're not trying to take too much territory at the same time. And they're trying to use what they're taking and as a way to negotiate, as a way to have a government in Bamako that they would want to negotiate with. So they are very, very strategic. And I think the Africa, it's a very porous border. The West and its allies have withdrew after Afghanistan. There's been also withdrawal from a lot of places in Africa, or also countries have been pushed out of Africa. And recently there's been so many former general AFRICOM commanders and African experts who have said we have lost the granularity to see the full threat picture there. We don't have eyes anymore on the ground, and the makeup and the demographics and the geography of Africa, the borders are so easy to go through, to cross. Africa serving as a logistical area. Libya, there's so many problems. Libya is facing its own problems. Sudan is facing a war. Mali, there's a bunch of coups happening in the West African region. And also there's another actor, the Islamic State, who's also JNIM has been fighting with, which adds and amplifies all these ways that these type of groups can take advantage of that region. And there's no UN presence, US presence. A lot of the missions have been leaving, and the region is up for grabs at that point. And the resources of Africa makes it, and how geographically it is situated makes it a great strategic angle and element for these groups, because they're like, we're gaining access to the waters, we're gaining access to the ports, we're gaining access to the resources, and we're also filling in government services and vacuums that now people are just, we want to be able to govern those people, give them what the junta and the leaders of these regions are not giving them. So they've been very smart, and they're playing the long game, and JNIM is playing the long game, which has always been the overarching strategy of Al-Qaeda core and Al-Qaeda as an organization.
Do we know what the relationship is like between JNIM and sort of Al-Qaeda Central? I mean, where do you is there an like Al-Qaeda Central? I normally think of it as Afghanistan, but then the most senior Al-Qaeda leader I know of now is Saif al-Adil, who apparently is in Iran. But what is this relationship between JNIM and the more centralized Al-Qaeda leadership wherever they are? And are they getting funding from the outside?
So when it comes to the relationship between the affiliates, it sits and rests on the chain of allegiance. So when Iyad Ghali, the leader of JNIM, founded JNIM in 2017, he pledged bay'ah and allegiance to the head of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM. It's the Al-Qaeda's Algeria branch and Islamic Maghreb branch in North Africa, and who in turn answers to Al-Qaeda's leader and main core and emir. So, and also when Iyad Ghali pledged allegiance and bay'ah to JNIM, he's also pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda core's leader at that point, Ayman al-Zawahiri, before Ayman al-Zawahiri was killed back in Kabul. So it's a chain of allegiance, and the relationship between JNIM and AQ core actually rests on the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, the Al-Qaeda affiliate in North Africa, which is now serving as the conduit between JNIM and between Al-Qaeda core. And AQIM is the organization that's been working with JNIM, that's been training it, that's been giving it experience and capabilities, because it is the older organization than JNIM. AQIM has been in the Al-Qaeda affiliate ecosystem much longer than JNIM has been. So AQIM is serving as this conduit between Al-Qaeda core and JNIM, and it's training JNIM. It's serving as the guidance, as the experienced branch. And when it comes to, so the relationship is still there. And yes, while Saif al-Adil is in Iran, as the UN monitoring team the latest time reported, he's been in Tehran, and with the circumstances now with the war, who knows where he could be. But Saif al-Adil is way of thinking and strategy is very different from how Bin Laden and Zawahiri led the Al-Qaeda organization. He's the first Egyptian he's the first military guy with actual military experience. He's an intelligence officer. He has actual military experience from the Egyptian Islamic Jihad back in Egypt. So he is now changing how Al-Qaeda is looking. Al-Qaeda of 2001 it no longer exists. It's the movement that came out of Al-Qaeda's 2001 that is now living, and JNIM is the example how that movement is shaping to be. And Saif al-Adil's way is he gives strategic guidance to all the affiliates via his books and the publications that come out. And he's recently published a book in 2023 where he lays out guidance for the affiliates, and JNIM gets some nods and some guidance in there too. He tells the affiliates to form unconventional, pragmatic relationships with other actors that could enhance and increase Al-Qaeda activities, that could be in benefits of Al-Qaeda's activities. And the FLA, the Azawad Liberation army within Mali stands as one of those unconventional examples of why JNIM is allying with them, and they have been the reason JNIM has also been able to sweep their latest offensive in April. And he also tells JNIM to start focusing on not just JNIM, all the affiliates, to be self-sufficient and fund themselves independently, so no actor can have influence on their activities. And shortly thereafter, granted, JNIM started to focus more on kidnapping for ransom. JNIM taxes its people, it governs, it uses not so much extortion as of right now, but there's been a lot of kidnapping for ransom. And the recent kidnapping for ransom was hostages from one of the Gulf countries, which the Gulf countries ended up paying JNIM as about $50 million. $50 million is a lot for anybody, let alone a terrorist organization like JNIM. And JNIM is like, yes, has other ways of financing, but that amount of money tells you like JNIM is doing well. It's strategic, it's smart, it's following the overarching guidance of the Al-Qaeda core, and it's now a structured decentralization. So the groups follow the general guidance, they follow the overarching strategic objectives of Al-Qaeda or as the organization, but they do it on their own ways in the regions because they are, from Al-Qaeda's view, the experts in those regions.
Can you say which country coughed up that much money?
I honestly cannot remember, but I do think it was the UAE.
Yeah, 50 millions goes a long way in Mali.
I think it was, but the hostage that JNIM took, I think, was a prince or some sort of like royal family. So, I mean, it's, you know, what else? I understand there's not much to do because you want the people back but also that starts a precedent where now we're also seeing other Al-Qaeda affiliates do that in other regions. AQAP's finances have also, Al-Qaeda in Yemen, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Al-Qaeda's branch in Yemen, used to be like quiet on decline the past couple of years. Just this past year, it's rebuilding, it's regenerating, it's causing concerns among the U.S. and international security officials, and it's also starting to emulate JNIM's model of kidnapping for ransom. And the amount of JNIM is described by so many UN reports and experts, the richest of Al-Qaeda's affiliates right after Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab makes $200 million a year. That's the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Somalia. So the money now that's just being generated by JNIM and Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Somalia, is not staying within those two groups in Africa. It's being circulated within other Al-Qaeda networks. And it is, as UN reports have mentioned, the relationship between the affiliates lately between JNIM, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, and Yemen have increased so much over the past couple of years, where they're much more embedded, work much more closer together, training, expertise, propaganda, messaging, financing. It's quite incredible for me to see that people assume that Al-Qaeda is a threat of the past. I think they keep thinking of the Al-Qaeda of 2001, the Al-Qaeda that conducted 9/11. And Al-Qaeda today does not need another 9/11 to be winning, to be on the path that it put itself out from the beginning. We defeated the Al-Qaeda of 2001, the centralized core based in Afghanistan. And now it's regaining and it's rebuilding after the withdrawal from Afghanistan. But the movement that came out of the 20 years of war in Afghanistan and the post 9/11 wars is much stronger movement Al-Qaeda has today than it had before 9/11.
Sarah, it's so fascinating for me to hear the extent to which kidnapping for ransom remains such a major vehicle of financing for JNIM and for these others. I remember this being a major issue when I worked in counterterrorist financing in government, and I was at the Treasury, and I can never forget this. In 2014 and 15, I was spokesperson, and you had a real surge in kidnapping for ransom from Al-Qaeda affiliates. In the Maghreb, it was among the worst, but also in Syria and elsewhere. And we used to get a lot of criticism from the Europeans, we, the United States, when we would press them on not engaging in kidnapping for ransom for the very reason you said, that it sets this precedent. And not only does it set a precedent, then the terrorist groups start targeting. You know, if they see a European citizen, they would kidnap them deliberately, knowing that governments would pay. And when it's a government, they'll pay a hefty price. And we had intelligence that we declassified and we put it in a speech. I can never forget this. Undersecretary David Cohen said it in a speech and said, we know for fact that Americans are not targeted for this reason because they're like, they're not going to pay. So let's move on to the Italian or the German or whomever. And this was constantly a source of angst between us and the Europeans. But it leads to my next question, actually, which is about the fact they have this amount of money and it's allowing them to become a pretty modern military force. And they are doing things like employing drones. They're using Starlink terminals. They have armored personnel characters. And we're seeing this in general. These terrorist groups become more sophisticated because of the advanced technologies out there that they can use. So I wanted to ask you, how is this militia, how are they in general getting these technologies? And are they using foreign fighters on the ground in Mali, or are they tribal and Islamist ones?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I think a lot of people, when you mention Al-Qaeda or you mention its affiliates, they think these groups are still operating from caves. And the facts are they're not operating from caves. They're actually very smart individuals. And Al-Qaeda core, at least as an organization, is known to really focus on education, on geopolitical analyses, on adaptation, on technological, what the enemy has. They also need to have it, as long as they can also have justifications for it. So even Saif al-Adil in his new book, there's many references to technology and cyber warfare and drones. And he also invokes renewed ambitions in weapons of mass destruction. And I've written actually a piece that revisits the Al-Qaeda weapons of mass destruction argument. And one of the reasons it's more serious right now, and it's threatening and highly concerning, is because the barriers to technology are lowering. These groups watch wars. They watch the adaptation of other actors when they're using drones. And when it comes to JNIM's use of drones, they modify them. I mean, it's so easy to order those on the black market. Some of their technology and equipment is actually captured. So their drones are modified DJI quadcopters and FPV racing drones that carry explosive charges. And JNIM also reportedly, as of recent reporting, have been using offline AI tools to plot the flight path and beat the jamming. And not only that, also JNIM has started to weaponize its drones, and it's also learning. And you have Al-Shabaab is now 3D printing and using night goggles to be a step ahead of the enemy. You have AQAP now also refocusing on maritime capabilities. So when it comes to specifically to JNIM, it had pioneered the armed drone use in the Sahel since September 2023, and it's carried out at least 69 drone attacks since, more than any other armed group in Africa. And the Starlink kits are usually bought on the black market and smuggled through the porous borders we discussed earlier in Africa, through Niger and Libya. And sometimes even when they buy these tools and these kits, they also break them down into different components to get past the border post and the border security. So also, like, JNIM's own combat footage, which they've been producing a lot more with the propaganda to show their wins and to show what they have and what they've captured, has shown Starlink dishes in the field since 2024. So for a force operating across a space the size at this point of Western Europe with no cell coverage, satellite internet has been also transformative for them. And when it comes to other equipments and other military type of tools, the armored vehicles are usually captured. And then every time JNIM overruns a base or it overruns a military post and kills soldiers, that event becomes a resupply event. Down to the anti-aircraft guns, it then turns it into an air force, and then it modifies it. And so it is becoming, and these groups are very adaptable. These groups learn, they understand, then they deploy the technology. And then when it comes to fighters, it's interesting. JNIM has not been relying on foreign fighters, actually. I think there's been a lot of lessons learned within the Al-Qaeda organization on the impact of fighters, especially what we've seen, the tension and the friction and the repercussions of what foreign fighters are capable of when they come in from different regions. We've seen that with Al-Shabaab in Somalia and the friction that occurred there, and the violent tools that end up, the more violent strategies these foreign fighters bring in with them, which can cause tension with what JNIM is trying to pursue, especially it's trying to relearn from lessons that like violence and like what AQIM was doing back in 2012 and the amputations and the brutal killings did not serve the community very well to recruit and to be that legitimate force. So JNIM has been focusing more on Sahel people from the region. They're focusing on recruiting from Bamako, recruiting from Nigeria, from Burkina Faso, from the coastal state recruits. But it's not a global influx like what we've seen when it came to the Islamic State in Iraq or Syria, with jihadists flying like from 40 countries. JNIM is not relying on foreign fighters as of this point. It's more reliant on recruiting from Tuareg, Fulani, Arab, Songhai, and Bambara communities, and everything that the army in Mali does, or the Russian state, or even the government or the junta, that leads to local grievances. JNIM focuses on those local grievances and starts recruiting from them as well. So those become these events become a recruiting base from itself because of those local grievances, which also goes back to how they've allied with the FLA based on the narrative and the local grievances aspects.
I mean, this is pretty alarming. How is the Western countries, even the local, the regional countries, the UN, how are they responding to this really dramatic shift? Because the French did send in a military force in 2013 specifically to combat this Al-Qaeda threat, and then they pulled out or were pushed out in 2022. So it just doesn't really seem like there's anyone standing in the way of JNIM right now, unless I'm missing something.
No, and it's a really harsh reality to also come in fact with, or like have to live with, because the truth is, yes, like France was pushed out after the 2020 and the 2021 coups. The junta itself made the French presence very untenable and formally expelled the mission. And the last French soldier, from what I remember, have left in August 2022. And then the 10,000 strong UN peacekeeping force was also terminated the following year. The junta replaced them with Wagner and decided to work with Wagner instead. So this is the Russian. This is the Russian Africa Corps. Yes. Yeah. And so the story is not of Western abandonment. It's a sovereign choice by a military regime to swap partners. And that choice has now been stress tested and failed. And to be honest with you, what's true is the West response has been minimal. I mean, the entire world globally, I mean, if we go back to the time of pre 9/11, we were dealing with one Al-Qaeda organization, one core, one terrorist group, and it focused in one region and centralized. Today, the world is mired with conflicts from left to right. We withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021. Al-Qaeda core is resurging, rebuilding there. But today, Al-Qaeda has affiliates all over the world, and their presence is much, much larger than it was before. Also, we have the Islamic State, and we have lone actors, and we have wars and conflicts, and we also have domestic issues. So, and each country in the West is also dealing with its own issues. So, our attention span, unfortunately, is very, very little, and experts in the West moves with what the news, and the West tends to be very reactive than proactive. When the Africa issue needs proactivity right now, you cannot wait until JNIM actually becomes. JNIM is currently a proto-state. It's not choosing to overrun Bamako right now. It wants to build slowly, but we cannot wait until JNIM becomes a state to actually deal with them. But also, that is what worries me, because jihadist governments is becoming normalized. I mean, the Taliban-run government, we've normalized other type of governments as well, and it maybe now it's easier for the West or Western government to actually deal with these actors as governments, as actual states, but also that risks setting up so many precedents, so many other issues to deal with. And the question is, which is the $1 million question, I think, in this community, is when does the JNIM issue becomes, now it's a local regional issue, but becomes a global issue? Al-Qaeda's never abandoned the 9/11 type of attacks or international terrorism. And Saif al-Adil says that explicitly in his book. It's not abandoned. It's never been the narrative that it's gone. It's been like, we will wait, we will strike selectively, it will be timed, it will be on our own terms. But who is it to say that once JNIM acquires this territory, doesn't use it as a launching pad for international attacks? I mean, we've seen Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. U.S. invaded Afghanistan because Al-Qaeda used it as a launching pad for international attacks for 9/11. So when does the risk of JNIM locally becomes this global risk? And that is the million-dollar question. And the thing is, as I said, they never abandoned that idea, and JNIM still follows the Al-Qaeda overarching strategic narrative and guidance. But it is going to be a cost-benefit analysis to them when they decide they want to attack, when they know that the attacks can benefit them, can benefit the Al-Qaeda brand, the profile being in the headlines again. But it's a calculus that they will be thinking about. But it doesn't mean that JNIM won't conduct attacks. We don't know. It can. Anything can change in minutes. I mean, same for any other Al-Qaeda affiliate that's gaining ground. And we know the 9/11 attacks showed us that safe haven, time, capability, and intent has resulted in the 9/11 attacks. So JNIM technically has all of these, and the resolve of Al-Qaeda as an organization, their commitment to their goals, their adaptability to our measures and to our technology, have shown that they are more likely will be like one of the Al-Qaeda or many of the Al-Qaeda affiliates to go to make a comeback on the global stage and stage another type of terrorist attack. And it's never been a matter of if, it's just going to be when. And that is why I think the international community needs to act sooner than later and do something, because Africa has not just been the place where Mali gains territory. It's a logistical facilitation nodes of hubs. It's where terrorist groups cooperate and compete, where they learn together, where they experiment, where they move things and smuggle and use borders in ways that we are not seeing anymore because we have lost visibility on the ground.
Well, and JNIM doesn't just seem to be satisfied with just taking Mali, right? They seem intent on creating an Islamist superstate that could include West African countries like Benin, Burkina Faso, and Niger. How serious of a threat is that?
I mean, it is a serious threat. Like it's difficult. It's difficult for me to see again the West just go with the news and forget about the Al-Qaeda threat and its affiliates. And yes, a lot of people seem to be stuck in the Al-Qaeda of 9/11, Al-Qaeda of 2001. But Al-Qaeda's main goal, one of its goals, which moves it between defensive and offensive, is to restore an Islamic caliphate. It wants to restore the Islamic caliphate that was during the Prophet Muhammad's days, the Islamic Empire. It wants the entire Islamic empires, the most expansive Islamic empires that happened under the Rashidun Caliphate and the Prophet Muhammad's times. And JNIM in Africa is just the start. This is the Al-Qaeda master plan. It's the territories. It wants to govern. It's not just a terrorist organization. It wants more than mass casualty attacks. It wants territory. It wants to govern, and it wants it on its own terms. So JNIM is operating and is holding territory more. It's holding territory as of 50% of the Malian territory at this point, from what I remember the statistics showed. And also, it's holding territory in 11 of Burkina Faso's 13 regions. And Burkina Faso now is where it conducts most of its attacks. JNIM is also active in Western Niger. It has struck Togo, Benin, Ivory Coast since 2019. It also claimed its first attack inside Nigeria last October. And per the UN, it also just appointed a new senior leader specifically to run expansion toward the coast. So violence in the Niger-Benin-Niger tri-border area nearly doubled from last year, and the fear is that would expand and go through the corridor to the Gulf of Guinea, which would connect the insurgency to ports, to more smuggling routes, and to new populations it can use to recruit, to train, to get expertise from. But also when it comes to the expansion, JNIM is very deliberate. It's very strategic. And as we've seen from Al-Qaeda, from the Bin Laden Abbottabad letters and the Bin Laden papers and the declassified ODNI documents, and I read and I spend a lot of my free time and non-free time going through the Al-Qaeda propaganda and everything they publish and they say. They're very focused on learning the lessons from the past, on ensuring that they do everything very slowly, very gradually, so they don't end up falling like the Islamic State fell when they grabbed territory so fast. They weren't able to sustain it afterwards. They were overstretched, and their ego led to their downfall. So JNIM is being very strategic, is being very deliberate in how it goes about it, how it consolidates. It wants to slowly consolidate. It wants to build, then it wants to be able to sustain later. So it falls with how Al-Qaeda is. Al-Qaeda's always played the long game as an organization, and its affiliates are doing the same thing. They're strategic, they're deliberate, they think through these things. They watch the world events and how they can benefit from it. They write lessons about it. They publish on it. And even Saif al-Adil is big on creativity, on critical thinking, and on learning from their mistakes and all of that. So what worries me is JNIM is already very expensive. It's concerning to a lot of people in this community, but also the fact is, it's an insurgent governance spreading along the lines of weak states and aggrieved communities with a leadership that has learned from Al-Qaeda's own failures, that empires declared too early collapse. So the restraint right now that we're seeing is actually what should worry us. It means that these groups are actually thinking in decades and not in our 4 years of election cycles.
Some analysts have read about, maybe this is hopeful, that JNIM could maybe follow the model of what happened in Syria, where an Al-Qaeda affiliate, which was known as HTS, kind of rebranded itself, apparently moderated itself, or that was the perception, and is actually running the state of Syria. Is that something JNIM could do to try to sort of moderate itself, make it more of a national movement? Or are they just too radical at this stage to go that route?
I mean, we thought HTS was too radical, but here they are running the government of Syria at this point. I think when it comes to Syria, Jay, it's a different demography, different geography, different type of ties that HTS had with Al-Qaeda core. However, I did write a piece not too long ago in March with the title of the piece with Lawfare is Ahmad Shara is building the state Abu Muhammad Jolani promised. There, he might have changed his suit. He might have moved from the fighter uniform to the presidential palace. But his thinking on how he envisioned an Islamic State when he was still a terrorist is still being translated in the actions and the way how the government is being formed, how the rules and laws are being thing. So if we were to look at JNIM is watching HTS closely. All of the Al-Qaeda affiliates watch the global news, watch how every event is going to impact them. So JNIM is watching Syria very closely, and the UN reported that explicitly, along with internal debates about the Al-Qaeda relationship going back to at least, I think, last of July. And the behavioral signs are there. I mean, JNIM's communique increasingly omits Al-Qaeda core reference. However, I think when it comes and there was an interview with one of the JNIM leaders where the group's messaging focused on negotiations, coexistence, and cross-ethnic unity, and its Tuareg allies in the FLA. We've seen them also work closely also with JNIM. And when I think Iyad Ghali was interviewed by Nasser, the France 24 journalist, he said that when he was asked that would you cut ties with Al-Qaeda, he responded, it's not a priority right now. And to be fair, JNIM wouldn't gain anything from cutting ties with Al-Qaeda right now. I mean, and even if there were to be ties cut in the future, it would be more of a public distancing rather than an actual break of the ties, because JNIM, as I mentioned earlier, AQIM is the conduit that JNIM has with Al-Qaeda core. So JNIM cares a lot about that relationship with AQIM that it has. And AQIM has been giving JNIM the guidance and the experience and the expertise because they are the older Al-Qaeda affiliate. And JNIM cares about that relationship a lot. And even from following their social media and their channels and all of that, you can see a lot of the time, sometimes the propaganda that's coming from Al-Qaeda's media organization arms is now folding AQIM with JNIM as like one organization. They are still distinct, and I'm not saying that they are the same organization, but JNIM cares too much about that relationship with AQIM in the current time for it to break ties, and it wouldn't benefit anything from breaking ties with Al-Qaeda in right now in the time being. But would it in the future distance itself as it garners the recognition that it wants? As probably, maybe, but I wouldn't think an official break of ties would be the thing that would happen. And JNIM is different. Its rank and file it's more seen as a local Al-Qaeda affiliate. It has a Fulani base. It's mobilized under the banner of jihad and Sharia. And also in that region, you have the Islamic State Sahel province, ISGS, standing there, and it's been fighting and competing with JNIM and offering the region there an alternative for JNIM. So even if there was a break on the table and it's not the priority, and doing so, if JNIM were to do so without religious justification, it would bleed its fighters back to the Islamic State. A break from the Al-Qaeda brand would cause too many complications within the regions, and JNIM also has ISGS to worry about there. And I think, and already we've seen ISIS supporters already accusing JNIM of nationalism just for allying with the Tuareg. So my answer is I don't think the likelier path would be a functional break, a public distancing in the future, and it would not be a declared one. And right now, JNIM is focusing more on governing locally, softening enforcement, keeping the bay'ah and the Pledge of Allegiance on paper, and let the time and all of that, the steps that they're doing, then decide what they want to do in the future. But it would not be a break from official break. It would be just a kind of distancing if it were to happen in the future.
Sarah, I want to expand a bit further on this point that you made earlier about one of the things that everybody should pay attention to, and that's a real risk here, is that as local as JNIM is, as you mentioned, the risk that we don't pay attention and this location ends up, they end up starting to use this area and region as a launching pad for other terrorist attacks around the world. And so I wanted to ask you two questions here. One is that whether there is any evidence that JNIM wants to use Mali to attack Europe or the United States, for example, and whether you think perhaps Al-Qaeda, which has a base in Iran, could collaborate with JNIM to launch attacks, particularly in response to the current war.
Yes, it is definitely interesting when it comes to the Iran. There are Al-Qaeda senior leaders in Iran, but I think right now, and I think it would be easier for them to deliver their messaging, and their guidance have been more on their communiques, on their books and all of that. And as I mentioned earlier, the international terrorism aspect of it has not disappeared. Al-Qaeda still wants to conduct terrorist attacks, but it wants it on its own terms. But Al-Qaeda also looks at all the factors that are happening, geopolitical. The Iran war right now, I think, complicates the aspect of international terrorism, and it complicates even the Saif al-Adl, Al-Qaeda's de facto leader in Iran, and Abdurrahman al-Maghribi, who are there. So, and also the fact that Taliban has been seeking international recognition. Al-Qaeda core that's been regaining and rebuilding in Afghanistan, and all the new training camps and the fighters there, they're also cognizant of the fact that any attack that comes specifically from Afghanistan is going to jeopardize Taliban's international recognition attempts, and it's also going to put back eyes on Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is playing the long game, but also it's playing a silent game right now. It wants eyes off of Al-Qaeda. It wants other actors to be reaping consequences of events and of attacks, and it doesn't want to end up going on the headlines. Saif al-Adl himself sees himself as more of the behind the scenes type of leader, lay low, take your time, and then surprise the community. So there would not be as per se as a collaboration. I think back AQAP, Al-Qaeda's branch in Yemen, has been the branch that has institutional memory of international attacks with the USS Cole and other international terrorist attacks that have targeted the West and its allies. So AQ Corps has given Al-Qaeda in Yemen the international attacks profile. So Al-Qaeda in Yemen is the group also known to have conducted those before, and it has known to have the people who have the explosive expertise, the engineers and the smart people as well. So could it be a coordination between all the affiliates? That's definitely possible. I mean, as I've mentioned, UN reporting have cited increased cooperation and overlapping ecosystem between the Al-Qaeda affiliates more than we've seen before. So whereas JNIM and Al-Shabaab now are the ones who are garnering the money, that money's being moved to the broader Al-Qaeda network, and that what the network decides to do with it later on, it's going to be up to the network itself to decide. But I do say international terrorism has not been denounced. Al-Qaeda's never said, we're never going to be conducting terrorist attacks. They will, but it's going to be on their time. It's going to be when those attacks will benefit Al-Qaeda, when they have something to gain out of it. Like if they want to be able to resume headlines, or they want to be able to recruit more for a different aspect. So it is something that they need to decide, and it's a calculus that they think about, but it's not something that they decided not to do ever. So it could be a coordinated attempt. It could be that the different branches are serving different purposes within different regions, where Al-Shabaab is serving the technology aspect. JNIM is also doing the money aspect. AQAP has been the branch that has stated its intent again to target the far enemy. We've seen since 2021, since withdrawal from Afghanistan and post October 7th attacks in 2023, terrorist groups have reiterated their intent to conduct attacks against the United States and its allies. Specifically, the branch that has done so has been Al-Qaeda in Yemen, where Ibrahim al-Qussi, the Al-Qaeda ideologue leader, has said that the next 9/11 will surpass the 9/11 from before. Saif al-Adl had said the same thing. Abu Muhammad al-Masri, the senior Al-Qaeda leader that was killed in Iran a couple of years back, also wrote a book reiterating the fact that we want to conduct attacks against the United States and allies. So you're seeing a lot of senior leadership echo those statements. Saad bin Atif al-Awlaki, Al-Qaeda's leader in Yemen, in his first appearance since taking the reign of the group in Yemen, has made threats against Western targets and the West. So the intent is back there, and it's mostly coming from the Al-Qaeda in Yemen branch, not from JNIM in the Sahel region. But could that change in the future? Could it be that it's the cooperation, the coordination between the affiliates acting as a force multiplier, as increasing their operational capacity as a whole organization? It is very, very, very possible. But I do think JNIM right now is more focused locally. It's gonna depend on what it wants, how it wants things done, and slowly. But also, JNIM has been focusing more, it seems from its behavior, it's focusing on its regional ambitions, and it's actually has been killing more Russians than other actors in the region. And also, the network itself still follows the core. JNIM has still pledges allegiance to Al-Qaeda and its strategic guidance, and Al-Qaeda core as an organization, per literally the UN report that was published in February, still retains ambition for spectacular international and external attacks. But the affiliates do not need right now, I think, an external attack. But also, the pre-9/11 lesson is that, as I mentioned earlier, is that sanctuary plus capability plus time changes these calculations. And also, we have to consider the competition. There are different layers of how their cost-benefit analysis would go. Would JNIM benefit from conducting an attack externally? Like, what would they benefit? Would that eventually amplify Al-Qaeda, or would it benefit Al-Qaeda right now? Also, would it benefit JNIM locally when it comes to its competition with ISGS in the region? Would that differentiate it from ISIS? I think JNIM is winning by localizing right now. And the Islamic State's Sahel province, ISGS, has every incentive to differentiate itself by going internationally. It's similar how ISIS-K in Khorasan started conducting international attacks when Taliban took Kabul. So including the attack against Russia, that was the Crocus City Hall attack. So could the competition between different actors push any of those actors to differentiate themselves by conducting an external attack? It's possible. Could it be JNIM? Could it be ISGS? I think time will tell, and it's going to be a cost-benefit analysis for both actors. But I would say it usually, from what we've seen in the past, the Islamic State is the group that conducts the international attacks to differentiate itself. It's the group that makes the noise. So I do believe if an attack in the short term were to happen from the Sahel region, it would be more likely to come from ISGS, from the Islamic State in the Sahel province, than from JNIM itself, because it would try to differentiate itself from JNIM and try to recruit, especially since JNIM is winning and is making headlines. So, and also there's always practical vectors to think about before any plot materializes or arrives. It's the kidnapping that they're doing right now of Westerners and of Gulf country people. There's the gold smuggling economy. There's a lot of things that goes into the consideration, the calculus of these groups before they conduct. It is the million-dollar question whether JNIM's local territorial control and local wins will translate into global ambitions. And also it's going to depend on the Al-Qaeda organization as a whole and what it decides itself as a cost-benefit analysis and what it would gain from these attacks and which affiliates were to launch them. So there are a lot of factors that the organization, that Al-Qaeda, is considering today before it conducts these attacks. And as we all know, they're very deliberate. They take their time, and attacks unfolds in years, not over a month.
So this has been a fascinating, if not terrifying, discussion. But to wind it up, I'd like you to put on your hat and, like, where do you think we are in 5 years? Would the U.S. and Europe really sit back and watch jihadists essentially take control of West Africa? And it's not just the West. You mentioned the Russians are fighting there to some extent. I can't imagine the Chinese are going to love having jihadis in control of, resource-rich in territory. So what's your prediction of where we are in, 4 or 5 years?
I think I would give you multiple predictions rather than a single prediction. I think the most likely, overarching picture in the 5 years is more of a hybrid map. Jihadist governed countrysides and corridors across Mali, Burkina Faso, capitals that survive as besieged islands or under governments that have quietly accommodated JNIM and other insurgent movements and insurgent actors. I could also see an insurgent economy taxing gold, livestock, and trade across borders. So we can call it the normalization of armed governance if we were to coin the term. The second scenario that I would see would be also political rupture, where another coup in Bamako or a negotiated settlement that brings JNIM into power in some form, which would make Mali the first state in the Al-Qaeda orbit since the Taliban Afghanistan, whatever name it trades under by then. The third is maybe fragmentation. The JNIM FLA alliance right now cracks over governing Kidal. The Islamic States explodes the seams. The region descends into overlapping civil wars. So that would be a third scenario, is where JNIM FLA alliance cracks over governing Kidal. The Islamic State decides to exploit those seams, and then the region descends into an overlapping civil war. I think I weigh the first the heaviest, but maybe the second more likely, where the first one is, we would see a hybrid map of jihadist governed countrysides and corridors across the region, and an insurgent economy taxing the resource and the supply chain. And on whether the West would really sit this back, Jay, we already are. The honest answer is that the West's revealed preference since 2022 has been retreat. And the things that could reverse that retreat or make the West act faster right now are specific. It would be a mass casualty terrorist attack on Western soil traced back to the Sahel. That would be one of the reasons the West decides to act. It could be a hostage crisis. We've seen kidnapping for ransom being a thing now. I could see a hostage crisis. Or a threat to coastal states like Ivory Coast, Ghana, or Senegal, where we start to see real Western economic and security equities live. So here, I think it all depends on the resource argument. That also cuts the other way from what people assume. Mali's gold does not need a functioning state to flow. It is already leaving through informal channels, and plenty of actors will trade with whoever controls the mines. So resource wealth did not save Afghanistan from being abandoned, and it will not by itself, I think, summon a Western intervention here. But what gets me to a different answer in 5 years is if the coastal states start to crack, then I think the conversation in Washington changes fast. And at that point, I think it's probably too late.
Wow. Sarah, this has been fascinating. I say this almost every podcast that our mind is blown. It's scarier for sure, but it's so important. People who do this kind of work is so important. What you're highlighting is so important. I certainly hope that we don't get to the scenarios that you've painted before everybody wakes up to realize that this is an issue of priority that needs to be addressed immediately. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time and discussing with us these very disturbing developments in West Africa. Before we go, where can listeners find you or learn more about your work? You mentioned a lot of articles you've written.
Yes, I've written articles with Lawfare, Defense One, War on the Rocks, The Washington Quarterly. I'm also on Twitter with at Dr. Sarah Harmouch. So I'm also there. A lot of my publications are open source, open on the internet. People can look them up. And I will be also publishing coming articles that will discuss some of these angles that we discussed, and more focusing on the technological adaptation, and which is a more terrifying issue also, is the weapons of mass destruction angle and terrorism, and how they're intersecting now with the lower barriers of technology. But thank you so much both for having me and for this important discussion. And I do think it is important that we talk about the things that are terrifying, because we need to find solutions. We need to start thinking about them before they materialize into a worst case scenario.
As though it wasn't scary enough, right? It could get worse.
Yeah, I know.
For listeners, if you've made it this far, please consider leaving us a review, hopefully a good one. It makes a real difference in helping people find us. And if you have an idea or question for us, or you just want to say hi, please send us a note. We'd love to hear from you at thethreatpod@gwu.email.edu. See you next time.